The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the United Nations Security Council chamber, casting an eerie blue glow across the faces of Earth's most powerful leaders. Ambassador Sarah Chun felt her stomach drop as the Galactic Assembly's seal materialized before them. A complex symbol representing the union of 47 star systems that had governed interstellar civilization for over 3 millennia. Distinguished representatives of Earth, the mechanical voice began, emanating from speakers positioned throughout the room. The translation matrix struggled briefly with certain concepts, creating an unsettling delay between words. The Galactic Assembly has reached a unanimous decision regarding Resolution 2847 Delta. Chun exchanged glances with Secretary General Martinez, whose weathered hands gripped the edge of the conference table. They both knew what was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud would make it real in a way that no amount of preparation could soften. By a vote of 46 systems to 0, with 1 abstention, the Assembly has determined that Earth's continued practice of maintaining and supporting defective biological units constitutes a violation of galactic efficiency standards as outlined in Charter Section 15.7. Your species has been granted a period of 12 solar rotations to comply with mandatory genetic optimization protocols. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Defective biological units. The clinical terminology made Chen's blood run cold. They were talking about people, human beings with disabilities, genetic conditions, mental health challenges, and physical differences that the galaxy had deemed inefficient. President Jackson leaned forward, his voice steady but carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. And if we refuse to comply with this optimization? The pause that followed stretched long enough for Chun to count her own heartbeats. When the voice resumed, its tone remained unchanged, as emotionless as a computer reading weather data. Non-compliance will result in immediate economic sanctions, followed by complete trade embargo and, ultimately, planetary quarantine. Earth will be removed from all galactic communication networks and excluded from interstellar travel privileges. Your civilization will be classified as a contaminated system and marked for eventual sterilization. The silence that followed was deafening. Chun looked around the room at faces that reflected her own horror and disbelief. These were seasoned diplomats, military leaders, and politicians who had seen humanity through First Contact, the integration wars, and decades of careful negotiation to secure Earth's place in galactic society. None of them had ever imagined facing a choice like this. General Morrison cleared his throat, his military bearing intact despite the tremor in his voice. What exactly does genetic optimization entail? Removal of all genetic variants that contribute to decreased productivity, increased resource consumption, or reduced cognitive capacity. This includes, but is not limited to, physical mobility impairments, sensory deficiencies, neurological divergences, metabolic disorders, and congenital malformations. The Galactic Medical Consortium has prepared detailed lists of qualifying conditions and recommended termination procedures. The word termination hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Chun felt bile rise in her throat as the full implications became clear. They weren't talking about genetic therapy or medical treatment. They were talking about systematic elimination of nearly 2 billion human beings. Dr. Williams, the chief medical advisor, spoke with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain professional composure while her world crumbled around her. Are there any exceptions? Children? Potential for treatment. Efficiency protocols recognize no exceptions based on age, social status, or theoretical medical interventions. The galactic standard is clear. Biological units incapable of contributing positively to system productivity must be eliminated to prevent resource waste and genetic contamination of future generations. Secretary General Martinez finally found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. This is genocide. You're asking us to commit genocide against our own people. The Assembly does not recognize the term genocide as applied to necessary biological optimization. 46 civilizations have successfully implemented these protocols with measurable improvements in system efficiency, resource allocation, and overall population wellness. Earth's continued resistance to establish galactic standards is noted as evidence of primitive ethical development. Chen watched as President Jackson's face cycled through several emotions: shock, rage, calculation, and, finally, a cold determination she'd never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would echo through human history. We need time to consider this ultimatum. 12 solar rotations, as stated. Galactic efficiency monitors will be deployed to track compliance. Non-compliance will be met with immediate consequences. The hologram flickered and died, leaving them in the sudden harsh glare of the chamber's regular lighting. For several minutes, no one spoke. The magnitude of what they'd just heard seemed too large to process, too monstrous to be real. But Chen had spent enough years in galactic diplomacy to know that this wasn't a negotiation tactic or political posturing. The Galactic Assembly operated on principles of cold efficiency that had governed their civilization for millennia. They genuinely saw no moral distinction between optimizing agricultural yields and optimizing sapient populations. President Jackson broke the silence. Options. I need to know what options we have. General Morrison consulted his tablet, his expression grim. Militarily? We don't stand a chance. Our entire defense fleet amounts to maybe a dozen ships that could barely scratch their escort vessels, let alone their battle cruisers. They have orbital superiority, superior technology, and 46 allied systems. If they want to sterilize Earth, they could do it from space without ever landing a single soldier. Economic resistance? Martinez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Dr. Patel from a Department of Interstellar Trade shook her head. We're completely dependent on galactic trade networks. Our medicine, our energy systems, our food production, everything relies on galactic technology and resources. A complete embargo would cause our civilization to collapse within months. Chen found herself thinking of her daughter, Maya, who had been born with cerebral palsy and was now a brilliant theoretical physicist working on quantum communication systems. Under the Galactic Assembly's definition, Maya was a defective biological unit whose life had no value. The thought filled her with a rage so pure it frightened her. What about other species? She asked. Surely someone in the galaxy must have refused. Someone must have stood up to this. The room fell silent again. Chen realized with growing horror that the answer was obvious. If anyone had refused, they wouldn't still be around to ask about. Dr. Williams pulled up historical data on her screen, her voice hollow as she read. The Zatari Collective voted for similar optimization in 2156. The Threnodai Empire implemented genetic purity protocols in 2089. The Vashti Republic. She stopped reading and looked up, her eyes haunted. Every single species that joined the Galactic Assembly eventually adopted these standards. The ones that refused. She gestured at empty space. They're not in the historical records anymore. President Jackson stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried a quality that Chun had never heard before. Not just determination, but something deeper. Something that spoke to the core of what humanity represented. Then, we're the first, he said simply. We're the first species to say no and mean it. General Morrison looked up sharply. Sir, with respect, saying no means the extinction of our entire civilization. They'll wipe us out. Maybe, Jackson acknowledged. But there are worse things than extinction. There are things worth dying for. And there are lines that, once crossed, make life not worth living. Chun felt something shift in the room, a subtle change in the atmosphere that seemed to transform defeat into something else entirely. Not hope, exactly, but a grim resolve that felt quintessentially human. What are you suggesting? Martinez asked. Jackson walked to the window that overlooked the East River, his hands clasped behind his back. I'm suggesting that if the galaxy wants to eliminate our disabled, our different, our unique, then maybe we don't belong in this galaxy. Maybe it's time to find our own path. You're talking about complete isolation. Dr. Patel protested. Technological regression. Millions of deaths from disease, starvation, system failures. I'm talking about remaining human. Jackson replied without turning around. About holding onto the values that make us who we are, regardless of the cost. Chen thought about the choice they were facing, comply, and murder 2 billion innocent people, or resist, and watch their entire civilization crumble. It was an impossible decision, the kind of ethical nightmare that philosophers had debated for centuries. But as she sat there, watching the president's reflection in the window, she realized that maybe some choices were only impossible if you were trying to find a compromise. There's a third option, she said quietly, the words coming to her, as if from somewhere else entirely. The room turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. We leave, she continued, her voice gaining strength. We pack up everything and everyone we can, and we leave. Not just Earth, the entire galactic community. We find somewhere they can't follow us, somewhere their efficiency protocols don't reach. And we build something new. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shocked quiet. This was the silence of minds racing, of possibilities being calculated, of a species beginning to glimpse a path forward that no one had considered. General Morrison was the first to speak, his tactical mind already working through the logistics. It would be the largest migration in human history, maybe the largest migration in galactic history. We'd need ships, resources, supplies for potentially decades of travel. We'd need destinations, Dr. Patel added, somewhere beyond galactic space, beyond their monitoring systems and territorial claims. Chun nodded, feeling pieces of an impossible plan beginning to take shape. The deep surveys have identified thousands of potentially habitable systems beyond current galactic borders. If we could reach them, if, Martinez emphasized, the technical challenges alone would be staggering. Moving billions of people across interstellar distances with limited resources and hostile opposition. President Jackson turned back to face the room, and Chen saw something in his expression that made her think of the explorers who had first crossed oceans, the settlers who had pushed into unknown continents, the dreamers who had reached for the stars. It was the look of someone who had found their purpose. Then, we better get started, he said, because we have 12 days to decide the future of humanity. And I know what my choice is going to be. As the meeting broke up and world leaders began the process of consultation and preparation that would define the next phase of human history, Chen remained seated, staring at the place where the galactic hologram had delivered its ultimatum. She thought about Maya again, about the contributions her daughter had made to human understanding of the universe despite, or perhaps because of, her disability. She thought about all the brilliant minds, the artists, the innovators, the simple, everyday humans who would be classified as defective under galactic standards. The galaxy had given them 12 days to choose between murder and extinction. Instead, humanity was about to choose something else entirely, something that would either elevate them beyond anything they'd ever achieved or destroy them in the attempt. Either way, Chen realized as she finally stood to leave, they would face that future as themselves, as humans, flawed, inefficient, beautifully imperfect humans who refused to let anyone else define their worth. The emergency session of the Global Council had been running for 18 hours straight, and the air in the massive assembly hall crackled with tension and caffeine-fueled determination. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat in concentric circles around a central holographic display that showed real-time data streams from across the planet. The numbers were staggering. Population counts, resource inventories, ship manifests, and technological assessments that would determine whether humanity's desperate gamble had any chance of success. Director Elena Vasquez rubbed her tired eyes and tried to focus on the logistics report scrolling past on her tablet. As head of the newly formed Exodus Planning Committee, she'd been tasked with something that 3 days ago would have seemed utterly impossible: organizing the evacuation of human civilization from Earth and the entire galactic community within 9 days. The scope of the undertaking made the ancient Exodus stories from human religious texts look like weekend camping trips. Current estimates suggest we can evacuate approximately 40% of Earth's population using existing interstellar transport capacity, reported Captain James Liu from the Global Space Command. His voice carried the exhaustion that had become common among all the committee leaders. That's roughly 3 billion people, assuming we commandeer every civilian transport, cargo hauler, and research vessel currently in Earth orbit or nearby systems. The number hit the assembly like a physical blow. 40% meant that 60%, nearly 5 billion people, would have to be left behind. The mathematics of survival had always been cruel, but Elena had never imagined facing equations quite this stark. Prime Minister Hassan spoke from the African Union delegation, her voice carefully controlled. What criteria are we using to determine who goes and who stays? The question that everyone had been dreading hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena looked around the assembly hall at faces that reflected her own anguish. How did you choose which members of your species deserved to survive when the choice was forced upon you by external threats? President Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his expression resolute despite the obvious weight of the decision. We start with those the galaxy wants to eliminate. Every person they've classified as defective gets priority placement on the evacuation ships. That's non-negotiable. A murmur of approval rippled through the assembly, but it was tinged with the bitter irony of the situation. The galaxy's demand for genetic optimization had become humanity's criteria for salvation, just in the opposite direction they'd intended. Dr. Sarah Kim from the Department of Colonial Planning pulled up a new display showing preliminary destination analysis. We've identified 17 star systems beyond current galactic territorial claims that show potential for human habitation. The closest is still 47 light-years from Earth, which means minimum travel time of 3 years, even with our fastest ships. 3 years in space with billions of refugees, muttered General Morrison from his position at the military advisory table. The logistical challenges are nightmarish. Food, water, life support, medical care, waste management, and that's assuming everything goes perfectly. Elena had been thinking about the same problems since the moment President Jackson had announced the evacuation decision. The numbers were daunting, but what worried her more were the human factors that couldn't be quantified on spreadsheets. How did you maintain morale, social cohesion, and basic civilization while essentially living in metal cans hurtling through the void for years? We need to think differently about this, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Cultural Preservation Institute. She was a small woman with an enormous intellect who specialized in sociological dynamics during crisis periods. We're not just moving people from one place to another. We're creating a new form of human civilization, one that will be defined by this journey as much as by our eventual destinations. Her words resonated with Elena in a way that pure logistics couldn't. This wasn't just about survival. It was about what kind of species humanity would become on the other side of this migration. The choices they made in the next few days would echo through generations. The galaxy sees our diversity as inefficiency, Dr. Tanaka continued, warming to her theme. But that diversity is also our greatest strength. We need to make sure we're not just preserving human life, but preserving the full spectrum of human experience and capability. Captain Liu brought up technical specifications on the holographic display. We can modify cargo vessels to serve as temporary habitation modules. It won't be comfortable, but it's survivable. The bigger challenge is propulsion and navigation. Most of our current ships rely on galactic navigation networks and fuel stations. Once we leave galactic space, we'll be on our own. What about the colony ships from the early expansion programs? Asked Ambassador Chun. I know they were designed for long-term independent operation. Elena felt a spark of hope as she accessed the historical records. The Generation Ship program was discontinued 20 years ago when galactic integration made long-term voyages unnecessary. But the infrastructure still exists. The Concordia, the New Horizon, the Terra Nova, they were all designed to support tens of thousands of people for decades-long journeys. Can we reactivate them? President Jackson asked. General Morrison was already pulling up technical reports. It would take months under normal circumstances. But if we mobilize every engineer and technician on the planet, work around the clock, strip parts from other systems. He paused, running calculations. Maybe. It's going to be brutal, and we'll be cutting every possible corner, but maybe. Elena felt the energy in the room shifting as the impossible began to seem merely improbable. The Generation ships could serve as the backbone of the evacuation fleet, with smaller vessels providing additional capacity and support. It was still a logistical nightmare, but it was a nightmare with parameters they could work within. "We need to address the elephant in the room," said Director Walsh from Global Intelligence. His expression was grim as he activated a new data stream. The Galactic Assembly isn't going to just let us walk away. They've already positioned monitoring stations throughout the solar system, and they're tracking all Earth vessel movements. The moment we start moving significant populations off-planet, they'll know exactly what we're doing. The sobering reality hit Elena like cold water. Even if they could solve the technical challenges of the evacuation, they still had to contend with a galactic civilization that had the power to stop them at any point during the process. "What kind of interference are we expecting?" asked President Jackson. "Unknown," Walsh admitted. "This is unprecedented. No species has ever attempted to leave the Galactic Assembly voluntarily. Their response protocols probably don't even exist yet. They might try to stop us immediately, they might wait to see if we actually follow through, or they might just let us go and sterilize Earth after we leave to make a point to other potential dissidents." Elena found herself thinking about the moral complexity of their situation. Even if they succeeded in evacuating 40% of Earth's population, they were still abandoning 5 billion people to whatever fate the galaxy decided for them. It was a form of triage on a civilizational scale, and the weight of those decisions was crushing. Dr. Williams from the medical committee brought up another crucial concern. We need to consider the psychological impact of what we're asking people to do. We're essentially telling them to abandon everything they've ever known, everyone they've ever loved, and trust us to deliver them safely to worlds they've never seen. The potential for panic, riots, social breakdown. "We tell them the truth," President Jackson said simply. "We tell them what the galaxy demanded, what the alternatives are, and what we're offering instead. Humans have faced impossible odds before. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters. This is just the latest challenge." Elena admired his confidence, but she couldn't shake her own doubts. Yes, humans had survived terrible challenges before, but they'd never faced anything quite like this. A deliberate choice between systematic murder and civilizational exile imposed by a galactic superpower that viewed them as primitive and inefficient. "There's something else we need to consider," said Dr. Patel from Economic Planning. "The psychological impact on the galaxy itself. 46 civilizations have accepted optimization protocols over the millennia. If humanity successfully rejects those protocols and survives, what does that say about the choices those other species made?" Elena hadn't considered this angle, but she immediately understood its significance. Human defiance wouldn't just be a rejection of galactic authority. It would be an implicit condemnation of every species that had submitted to genetic optimization. The political ramifications could destabilize the entire galactic order. "You're suggesting they might pursue us beyond galactic space," Captain Liu said, his tactical mind grasping the implications immediately. "I'm suggesting they can't afford to let us succeed," Dr. Patel replied. "Our existence becomes a contradiction to everything their civilization is built on. Every time one of their species produces an individual with a disability or genetic variance, they'll have to wonder if they're making the wrong choice." The room fell silent as the full scope of their challenge became clear. They weren't just evacuating Earth. They were essentially declaring philosophical war on the foundational principles of galactic civilization. The galaxy couldn't allow them to succeed without calling into question 3 millennia of social engineering and species optimization. Elena looked around the assembly hall at the exhausted faces of humanity's leaders and felt a strange sense of pride mixed with her terror. They were attempting something that no species in galactic history had ever tried. They were choosing their own path, regardless of the consequences, because they believed there were principles worth preserving even at the cost of their own destruction. "So we need contingency plans for pursuit," General Morrison said, his military training taking over. "Defensive capabilities for the evacuation fleet, fallback positions, alternative routes to our destination systems." "We need more than defensive capabilities," Elena realized. "We need technological independence. If we're going to survive beyond galactic space, we can't rely on galactic technology, galactic fuel, galactic anything. We need to rebuild our entire technological base from scratch." The magnitude of what she was suggesting hit the room like a thunderbolt. It wasn't enough to evacuate people. They needed to evacuate an entire civilization's worth of knowledge, technology, culture, and capability. They needed to compress thousands of years of human development into portable form and carry it with them to the stars. Dr. Kim brought up new projections showing resource requirements for technological independence. "We need manufacturing capability, research facilities, raw materials processing, energy generation, essentially a complete industrial base distributed across the evacuation fleet. The generation ships can serve as mobile industrial platforms," Captain Liu suggested. "If we can modify them properly, they could function as traveling factories and research stations." Elena felt the pieces beginning to come together in her mind. Not just an evacuation, but a transformation. Humanity would emerge from this exodus as something new, a civilization defined not by territory or tradition, but by shared values and mobile technological independence. "How long do we have?" President Jackson asked. Elena checked the countdown timer that had become a constant presence in all their planning sessions. 6 days, 14 hours until the galactic deadline. After that, we either start complying with optimization protocols or face the consequences. "Then, we better get to work," Jackson said, standing up from his chair. "Every department, every nation, every organization. We have 6 days to accomplish what should take 6 years. And we're going to do it because the alternative is unacceptable." As the assembly dispersed into working groups and planning committees, Elena remained in her chair for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were attempting. 40% of humanity fleeing into unknown space aboard hastily modified ships, carrying the hopes and dreams of their entire species. It was insane. It was impossible. It was probably suicidal. It was also the most human thing she could imagine. The modified cargo bay of the UES Terra Nova hummed with activity as families said their final goodbyes to relatives who wouldn't be making the journey. The cavernous space had been hastily converted into a departure terminal, its industrial walls covered with banners from every nation on Earth, a deliberate reminder of the diversity the galaxy had demanded they eliminate. Commander Maria Santos stood at the observation deck overlooking the chaos below, her tablet displaying real-time updates from across the solar system. 3 days. They'd accomplished in 3 days what should have been impossible: the mobilization of the largest evacuation in human history. The numbers scrolling across her screen still seemed surreal. 2.8 billion people loaded aboard a hastily assembled fleet of 400 ships, from massive generation vessels to converted mining barges. Status report from Fleet Group 7, called out Lieutenant Commander Hassan from the communications station. "The New Horizon has completed passenger loading and is requesting permission to begin system departure." Santos felt a familiar knot of tension in her stomach. Every ship that left Earth's gravitational influence was another small victory against impossible odds. But also another target for potential galactic intervention. So far, the Assembly's monitoring stations had remained passive, content to observe the frantic activity throughout the solar system without direct interference. That worried her more than open hostility would have. Permission granted, she responded. Remind Captain Torres to maintain communications blackout once they reach the outer system boundary. If the galaxy wants to track our destinations, they'll have to work for it. The past 72 hours had been a masterclass in human ingenuity under pressure. Engineers had worked around the clock to retrofit cargo holds with life support systems. Medical facilities had been miniaturized and distributed across the fleet, and the planet's entire food production surplus had been processed into portable rations that could last for years. Most impressively, they'd managed to evacuate the complete contents of 12 major research institutions, including genetic banks, cultural archives, and technological databases that represented the sum total of human knowledge. Dr. Yuki Tanaka approached from the Cultural Preservation Station, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. We've confirmed secure storage of 847,000 individual cultural artifacts across the fleet. Literature, art, music, historical documents, religious texts. Everything we could digitize or physically transport. Santos nodded, though she couldn't help thinking about everything they were leaving behind. Every human settlement, every monument, every place where their species had built something meaningful. In 3 years, when they reached their destination, Earth would be a memory rather than a home. Any word from the surface about the remaining populations? Tanaka asked. Santos checked her tablet, though she already knew the answer would be painful. Global Council estimates suggest approximately 4.2 billion people will remain on Earth after the evacuation concludes. President Jackson is maintaining the position that compliance with galactic optimization protocols is still under consideration. But she didn't need to finish. Everyone in the fleet knew that the moment their ships left galactic space, Earth's remaining population would become subject to the Assembly's efficiency standards. The mathematics of their survival had required them to abandon the majority of their own species to save the minority the galaxy wanted to eliminate. It was a moral weight that made the physical challenges of interstellar travel seem trivial by comparison. Commander, Lieutenant Park's voice carried urgent alarm from the sensor station. I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Multiple contacts, definitely artificial. Santos felt her blood chill as she moved to the sensor display. The signatures were unmistakable. Galactic vessels, large ones, approaching at sublight speeds that put them hours away from Earth, but well within striking distance of the evacuation fleet. Classification? She asked, though part of her already knew. Preliminary analysis suggests battle cruiser configuration. Park replied, his voice tight with concern. At least 12 vessels, possibly more. They're not broadcasting identification signals, but the energy signatures match Assembly military specifications. Santos activated the fleet-wide communication system, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether their evacuation became a successful exodus or a catastrophic massacre. All vessels, this is Fleet Command. We have confirmed galactic military approach to Earth space. All evacuation ships are to accelerate departure schedules immediately. I repeat, begin emergency departure procedures now. The response was immediate and chaotic. Across the solar system, ships that had been conducting final loading operations began powering up their engines and releasing their docking clamps. Families were separated mid-goodbye as emergency departure protocols took precedence over emotional needs. Dr. Williams' voice crackled over the communication system from a medical coordination center. Commander, we have over 200,000 people still in transit to departure points. If we leave now, we abandon them entirely. Santos closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of impossible decisions crushing down on her. Stay and risk losing everyone to galactic intervention, or leave and abandon nearly 250,000 people who were already committed to the exodus. How long do we need to complete current loading operations? She asked. Minimum 4 hours, Williams replied. And that's assuming perfect coordination across all departure points. Santos looked at the tactical display showing the approaching galactic vessels. Even at their current speed, they'd reach Earth space in less than 3 hours. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. All fleet commanders prepare for immediate departure, she announced, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Current loading operations have 15 minutes to complete, then we leave. The protest began immediately. Voices from across the fleet demanding more time, arguing for different priorities, pleading for their friends and families who were still en route to departure points. Santos listened to it all with the stoic professionalism that command required. While inside, she felt like she was dying a little with each desperate voice. Captain Lu's voice cut through the chaos from the Terra Nova's engine room. Commander, we have a problem. The hasty modifications to our propulsion systems weren't designed for emergency acceleration. If we push too hard, we risk catastrophic failure. Another impossible choice. Rush the departure and risk losing ships to mechanical failure, or delay and risk losing everything to galactic intervention. Santos found herself wondering how many species throughout galactic history had faced similar decisions, and how many had simply chosen surrender rather than deal with the crushing weight of command during civilizational crisis. Engineering assessment, she ordered. What's the maximum safe acceleration we can achieve without risking system failure? 60% of optimal departure speed, Lu replied after a moment of calculation. But, Commander, at that rate, the galactic vessels will intercept us before we clear the solar system. Santos stared at the tactical display, watching the convergence of impossible forces that would determine humanity's future. Too slow, and they'd be caught. Too fast, and they destroy themselves. The narrow path between catastrophic failure and outright destruction was becoming vanishingly small. That's when Dr. Chen's voice came over the communication system from the Terra Nova's research division, carrying an excitement that cut through the despair like a knife. Commander, I need you to see this immediately. We've just decoded part of the galactic communication traffic, and there's something you need to know about those incoming ships. Santos felt a spark of hope mixed with suspicion. Good news during a crisis usually meant someone had missed something crucial in their analysis. Go ahead, Doctor. The approaching vessels aren't broadcasting standard military identification because they're not standard military vessels, Chen explained, her words coming rapidly with excitement. The energy signatures match assembly specifications, but the configuration is wrong. They're too small, too fast, and they're not following standard approach vectors. Santos frowned at the tactical display, trying to understand what Sean was suggesting. What are you saying? I'm saying those might not be assembly ships coming to stop us, Chen replied. I think they might be someone else's ships, using captured or modified galactic technology. The implications hit Santos like a physical blow. If Chen was right, it meant that humanity wasn't the only species that had problems with the Galactic Assembly's efficiency standards. It meant there might be allies out there, other civilizations that had chosen resistance over compliance. Can you confirm this analysis? Santos asked. Give me 10 minutes with the full sensor array, Chen replied. If I'm right, this changes everything about our situation. Santos looked around the command center at the exhausted faces of her crew, people who had been working for 3 days straight to accomplish the impossible. The weight of command had never felt heavier, but for the first time since this crisis began, she felt like they might have options beyond simply running or dying. You have your 10 minutes, she announced. All ships maintain current departure preparations, but hold emergency acceleration until we get confirmation on those contacts. As Chen's team worked to decode the approaching signals, Santos found herself thinking about the broader implications of their exodus. They'd assumed that leaving galactic space meant isolation, abandoning not just Earth, but any hope of contact with other sapient species. But if there were other civilizations that had rejected the Assembly's optimization protocols, then humanity's journey into the unknown might be less lonely than they'd anticipated. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Santos watched the tactical display as the unknown vessels continued their approach, noting details that supported Chen's analysis. Their formation was too loose for military precision. Their approach vector was indirect rather than aggressive, and their speed suggested urgency rather than attack posture. "Commander!" Chen's voice carried triumph and wonder in equal measure. "Confirmed, these are not assembly vessels. The ships are broadcasting identification code from the Kithra Republic and the Zephyrian Collective, but both of those civilizations are listed as extinct in galactic records." Santos felt the universe shift around her as she grasped the full significance of Chen's discovery. Not extinct, exiled. Other species that had made the same choice humanity was making now, that had left galactic space rather than submit to optimization protocols. "They're hailing us," reported Lieutenant Park from communications. "Multiple frequencies, multiple languages. The translation matrix is working on it, but the preliminary message appears to be welcoming." Santos activated the ship-wide communication system, knowing that her next words would reshape humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. "All vessels, this is Fleet Command. Stand down from emergency departure procedures. We have confirmed friendly contact with non-galactic civilizations. I repeat, we are not alone out here." The response from across the fleet was immediate and electric. Cheers, tears, and incredulous laughter as 2.8 billion humans learned that their exodus into the unknown was actually a journey toward an alliance they'd never imagined possible. As the first clear transmission from the approaching ships came through the translation matrix, Santos felt something she hadn't experienced since this crisis began: genuine hope. "Human vessels, this is Fleet Commander Zarthak of the Free World Alliance. We have been monitoring galactic communications regarding your species situation. We come to offer assistance and sanctuary to those who choose freedom over optimization." Santos smiled for the first time in days as she realized that humanity's rejection of galactic efficiency standards had just gained them something far more valuable than they'd lost: allies who understood exactly what they'd chosen and why they'd chosen it. The Exodus was no longer a desperate flight into isolation. It had become the first step toward joining a community of species that value diversity over efficiency, freedom over optimization, and the messy, inefficient, beautiful complexity of natural life over the sterile perfection the galaxy demanded. They were going home. 5 years after the Great Exodus, the Kepler 442 system buzzed with activity that would have been impossible to imagine during humanity's darkest hours fleeing Earth. Commander Maria Santos, now serving as colonial administrator, stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched the daily dance of ships moving between the 17 worlds that had become home to the Free World Alliance. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as a desperate escape had evolved into the most dynamic and innovative civilization the galaxy had ever seen. The three species that comprised the Free World Alliance, humans, Kithra, and Zephyrians, had discovered that their shared rejection of galactic optimization protocols had created something unprecedented, a society built on the principle that diversity was strength rather than inefficiency. Daily Productivity Report, Administrator, announced DR. Sarah Chun, her mobility exoskeleton allowing her to navigate the station despite the spinal injury she'd sustained during the Exodus. Under galactic standards, she would have been classified as defective and eliminated. In the free worlds, she'd become the chief architect of their revolutionary technological development program. Santos accepted the tablet with a sense of satisfaction that still felt new after years of crisis management. The numbers were extraordinary, research output exceeding galactic standards by 340%, innovation rates that dwarfed anything in assembly records, and, most remarkably, happiness indices that suggested their populations were thriving rather than merely surviving. The Zephyrian collective consciousness research has yielded another breakthrough. Chun continued, her excitement evident. They figured out how to link human creativity with Kithra analytical processing. The resulting hybrid intelligence has solved 17 previously intractable engineering problems in the past month. Santos nodded, though she still sometimes marveled at the casual way they discussed capabilities that would terrify the Galactic Assembly. The free worlds had discovered that when different species work together as equals rather than trying to optimize themselves into conformity, the results were exponentially more powerful than the sum of their parts. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The galaxy had demanded they eliminate their defective populations to increase efficiency, but those same populations had become the driving force behind innovations that made galactic technology look primitive by comparison. "Any word from the reconnaissance missions?" Santos asked. Chin's expression grew more serious. Admiral Torres reports that galactic military presence in human space has tripled since our last intelligence gathering. They've established a permanent blockade around Earth and begun what they're calling pacification protocols for the remaining human population. The weight of their abandoned homeworld still pressed on Santos' mind daily. The 4.2 billion humans they'd left behind had become subject to the very optimization protocols the Exodus had been designed to escape. Reports from deep cover sources suggested that the process was being implemented gradually, but the ultimate goal remained unchanged: the elimination of anyone the galaxy deemed genetically inefficient. And the other developments? Santos asked, though she suspected she already knew what Sean was going to tell her. 17 more species have sent covert delegations requesting information about joining the Free World Alliance, Chin replied. The Thylosians, the Meridari Confederation, 3 separate Andromedan colonies, and this is the big one, the Centauri Federation. Santos felt her eyebrows rise. The Centauri Federation represented nearly 2 billion sapients across 12 star systems. If they joined the alliance, it would effectively double their military and economic capabilities overnight. What's driving the increased interest? Santos asked, though she suspected the answer. Word is spreading about our technological capabilities, Chin explained. The galaxy has maintained stability for 3 millennia through standardization and optimization, but they've also created technological stagnation. When species started hearing about our innovation rates and the new technologies we're developing, Santos finished the thought. They started questioning whether optimization was really making them stronger or just making them all the same. It was a development they'd anticipated but hoped to delay until the free worlds were better prepared for the political ramifications. Every species that joined their alliance was a direct challenge to the fundamental principles that held the Galactic Assembly together. Eventually, that challenge would become too significant to ignore. Lieutenant Commander Park approached from the communication station, his expression urgent. Administrator, we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Torres says it's classified maximum and requires your immediate attention. Santos followed Park to the Secure Communications Center, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety that had never completely left her since the Exodus began. Good news rarely required maximum classification. Admiral Torres' image materialized in the holographic display, his battle-scarred features showing a mixture of excitement and concern that Santos had learned to recognize as the prelude to universe-changing events. Maria, Torres began without preamble. We've intercepted galactic military communications that change everything about our situation. The Assembly isn't just planning to deal with the Free World Alliance. They're planning to deal with the concept of resistance itself. Santos felt her blood chill. What kind of planning? Complete sterilization of all systems that have rejected optimization protocols, Torres replied. Not just military conquest or economic sanctions. They're talking about rendering entire star systems uninhabitable to ensure that no other species can ever use them as examples of successful resistance. The magnitude of what Torres was describing hit Santos like a physical blow. The galaxy wasn't just planning to eliminate the Free World Alliance. They were planning to eliminate any possibility that future species might choose the same path humanity had chosen. Timeline, Santos asked. Intelligence suggests they're mobilizing resources for a massive military operation within the next 6 months, Torres replied. The largest fleet assembly in galactic history. They're calling it Operation Final Efficiency. Santos stared at the tactical projections Torres was transmitting, trying to process the scale of the threat they were facing. The Galactic Assembly was preparing to deploy nearly 40% of their total military capacity against the Free World Alliance and any species that showed signs of joining them. Recommendations? She asked. Torres' expression grew grim. We have 3 options. Option 1. We scatter the Alliance across multiple star systems beyond galactic reach and hope they don't pursue us indefinitely. Option 2. We accelerate recruitment efforts and try to build a coalition large enough to deter galactic aggression. Option 3. He paused, and Santos saw something in his expression that reminded her of President Jackson during those final days on Earth. The look of someone who had found their line in the sand. Option 3 is we stop running, Torres continued. We use our technological advantages to hit galactic infrastructure and military assets. We make it clear that the cost of eliminating diversity in the galaxy is too high for them to pay. Santos felt the room shift around her as she grasped the full implications of what Torres was suggesting. Not just resistance, but active warfare against a galactic civilization that outmassed them by several orders of magnitude. You're talking about revolution, she said quietly. I'm talking about survival, Torres replied, and about ensuring that no species ever again faces the choice between genocide and exile. The galaxy has spent 3 millennia building a civilization based on conformity and fear. Maybe it's time to show them what a civilization based on courage and diversity can accomplish. Santos thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years ago, they'd been refugees fleeing the destruction of their own diversity. Today, they were the nucleus of an interstellar alliance that represented something genuinely new in galactic history. The question was whether they were ready to fight for the right to exist. What kind of capabilities are we talking about? Santos asked. Torres activated a new display showing technological assessments that made Santos' breath catch. The innovations that had emerged from Free World's research programs weren't just improvements on galactic technology. They were revolutionary advances that rendered many galactic systems obsolete. Hybrid consciousness networks that allow real-time coordination across multiple species, Torres explained. Quantum manipulation technologies that can disrupt galactic communication networks. Adaptive defense systems that learn and evolve faster than galactic military doctrine can respond to them. And that's just the beginning. Santos looked at the projections and realized that humanity's greatest weakness, their stubborn refusal to conform to galactic standards, had become their greatest strength. While the galaxy had spent millennia perfecting existing technologies, the free worlds have been inventing entirely new categories of capability. There's something else, Torres continued, his expression growing more complex. We've been in contact with resistance movements throughout galactic space. Species that accepted optimization, but never stopped regretting it. If we move against the assembly, we won't be doing it alone. The implications were staggering. Not just a war between the Free World Alliance and the Galactic Assembly, but a galaxy-wide revolution that would reshape the fundamental principles of interstellar civilization. Santos turned to Dr. Chun, who had been listening to the briefing with growing excitement. Assessment. From a technological standpoint, we can do it, Chun replied. Our capabilities have advanced far beyond what the galaxy has ever encountered. From a strategic standpoint, we might be the only ones who can do it. If the assembly succeeds in eliminating resistance, the galaxy becomes locked into their optimization model permanently. Santos looked out through the observation deck at the bustling activity of New Geneva Station. Humans working alongside Kithra and Zephyrians individuals who would have been eliminated under galactic protocols contributing to innovations that were reshaping the possibilities of sapient civilization. The sight filled her with a determination that surprised her with its intensity. "Send a message to all free world's military commanders," she announced. "We're calling an emergency strategy session. If the galaxy wants to eliminate diversity, they're going to discover what diversity is truly capable of when it fights back." As Torres' image faded from the holographic display, Santos felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders once again. 5 years ago, they'd chosen exile over genocide. Today, they were choosing revolution over extinction. The galaxy had wanted humanity to eliminate their disabled, their different, their unique. Instead, humanity had built a civilization that celebrated those very differences as sources of strength. Now it was time to show the galaxy what they had missed by choosing conformity over diversity. The Free Worlds Alliance was no longer running from galactic civilization. They were preparing to offer it a choice: evolve or be replaced by something better. Either way, the age of optimization was coming to an end, and the age of true diversity was about to begin. Santos smiled as she began composing the message that would announce humanity's return to galactic space, not as refugees or supplicants, but as liberators carrying the promise that difference was not deficiency, and that the greatest strength of any civilization was its willingness to embrace the full spectrum of what life could become. The galaxy had voted to eliminate Earth's disabled. Humanity had chosen to abandon the galactic order. Now, it was time to build something worthy of that choice.